Welcome to Zoom In, Zoom Out, your global look at news from Taiwan. I'm Louise Watt. Taiwan heads to the polls this weekend to elect a new president and legislature, and the world is watching. That includes Taiwanese media. According to Reporters Without Borders, Taiwan enjoys one of the freest media environments in Asia. So how is this freedom affecting the quality of its democracy? To discuss this, we're joined by Chiaoning Su. She teaches communication and journalism at Oakland University. Prior to academia, she'd also participated behind the scenes in Taiwan's political campaigns. Chiaoning, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, Reporters Without Borders, as well as saying Taiwan has one of the freest media environments in Asia, it also says Taiwan's journalists suffer from a very polarized media environment dominated by sensationalism and the pursuit of profit. What do you see as the main problem in Taiwan's media environment?
Right, so that's a great question. The media landscape in Taiwan has experienced a lot to achieve its current state. If you think about Taiwan was under martial law for almost 4 decades, that means for a very long time, the media landscape in Taiwan was completely under control and censorship, and people here didn't have freedom of speech and freedom of press. And so after 87, when martial law was lifted, especially in 93, the passage of Cable Television Act, that was the time you started to see the rise of 24/7 cable news in Taiwan, competing against each other fiercely. So you also saw they started to use sensationalized approach to attract more viewership, because that's really how they make their profit, right? And then once we enter into the new millennium, you saw the arrival of Apple Daily from Hong Kong, known for their paparazzi reporting culture. That just add another layer of sensationalism to the Taiwan media landscape. And then later on, we saw the rise of the Wang group in Taiwan, which really represent the China factor, how China is affecting the Taiwanese media landscape.
And when we talk about media freedoms, what does that mean, media freedom, would you say?
Media freedom would be the media has the autonomy, the independence in the newsroom to pursue specific news topics. They are not by instruction of specific political parties. They are not under influence of specific political agenda, and they use credible, trustworthy news sources for their news writing and news reporting. And they use at least more than 2 sources to clarify, to corroborate their story. And I think that would be what we consider news independence and news agency.
So given that definition, how free would you say Taiwan's media is? How do they adhere to this principle of media freedom?
Yes, unfortunately, I do see a lot of local media does have this political leaning and under specific political ideology. They are doing this not necessarily because they are owned by a specific political party, but more because they realize this is what their audience would like to see, right? They are under fierce competition against each other, so they would try various tactics just to get more viewership, more audience. So if they realize, oh, our target audience are actually with this political leaning, then more likely they are going to do their storytelling in a specific way to meet the demand of the audience. And that's what we are seeing, and one of the reasons that we can explain the polarization of Taiwan's news media.
Is that a part of the reason why there is such low trust in Taiwan's media? So the Reuters Institute did a survey that showed that only 28% of Taiwan's population trusts in news overall, and that was one of the lowest in the survey. What are the reasons for this low level of trust?
I think we can explain this low trust from different perspectives. On the one hand, I think this is not a Taiwan exclusive problem. If you look into the public trust in media, you see this growing distrust across the world. In the US, I don't think people trust the mainstream media anymore, especially after the rise of Trump, right? Use the term fake news to describe legacy media. So there is also very low trust in media in the US as well. And we are seeing that in Taiwan as well. But on top of that, you can also explain this phenomenon from a local perspective. The Taiwanese media used to under the government control for so long. I think that's the legacy of our authoritarian past. That would be another factor to explain distrust in media altogether, because it has been there for decades. Because a lot of people, especially the older generation, tend to believe that the government can control the media. And some people now accuse the ruling party for doing this media control, and that explains why the low trust in local media.
And there's a phrase in Taiwan, parents will often say to their children, if you don't study hard, you'll become a journalist. Where does this phrase date from? How far back does that go?
Yeah, that's interesting, because I was a sociology major back then, but I was so inspired to become a reporter when I was an undergraduate student. So back then, being a reporter was not such a bad thing. But slowly over time, because I think this fierce competition led to low quality news reporting. Some were just a common mistake, some were ridiculous or intentionally manufactured. And I think that's why people started to have low regards on local media.
Ian, you mentioned there Taiwan suddenly had all these 24-hour news channels. I mean, it's quite incredible that Taiwan has more 24-hour news stations than the US and the UK combined. So does all these media outlets, does it contribute to a more informed political debate in Taiwan, would you say?
On the one hand, they really offer a lot of information for everyday news consumers. But on the other hand, they are also in this fierce competition against each other. So a lot of times I don't feel like they do the fact-checking the most accurately. They offer the best quality information, and that could be a problem for the news consumer on a daily basis.
Now let's zoom in a moment now on Taiwan's elections and how the media is reporting it.
Yeah.
How do you see Taiwan's local media reporting on the upcoming elections compared to international media, for instance? What is the different focus?
Right. So when we think about journalism, journalism is about informing the society, but also about responding to the audience needs, right? So how do you find this relevance? And how do you find impact to respond to the audience curiosity is the key. And so for that reason, it is understandable why you see differences between the local news coverage and international news coverage. When we think about the local coverage of this upcoming election, a lot of times they focus on local issues, the theatrics, the possible alliance between TPP and KMT. I think
they're the two main opposition parties.
The two main opposition party. I think they spent almost like 3 months just to cover the potential alliances and the eventual fail apart. They spent a lot of time just focusing on the theatrics and the details. But for international news practices, I think they focus more on the repercussion of this election, like how the result would have an impact on the country itself, the cross-strait relations, the regional impact, the Indo-Pacific region, how is the region going to be affected by the election result? I think they have a different angle because of the demand of the audience.
Taiwan is one of the countries most at risk of disinformation and has to deal with disinformation on a daily basis. How do you see this playing out in the media? Is the media susceptible to disinformation?
I think so, in a way that because some of this misinformation tend to be an opportunity for the media to get the audience attention, right? Some of the misinformation, the claim itself is quite outrageous, it's sensational, and that becomes an opportunity for the media to get more audience attention. So they will happily engage such conversation, and that's why sometimes media are just susceptible to this misinformation. But on the other hand, you saw how different topics being manipulated in a way to interfere local politics. We saw a lot of discussion about local issues, not having enough eggs. Why are we exporting all these eggs from Brazil so expensive? Must be some kind of corruption. And then moving on to, oh, the quality of the eggs are so bad, so this is a public health issue. And then it was about the issue between should we put more trust in our allies? Like the US is exploiting Taiwan, forced Taiwan to open this TSMC factory in Arizona, and that is definitely try to dry out Taiwan resources and abandon Taiwan altogether. So American skepticism is another.
Are you seeing any signs that the media is aware of this more sophisticated tactic and doing anything to address it?
Yes. So, for example, I think there is at least one local news channel try to work with Taiwan Fact Check Center and very consciously incorporate their report into their news coverage. I think that's a good sign that the local media are aware of the situation of this misinformation. And also this time around during the election season, I think a lot of international media produce stories about this misinformation, especially waged by Beijing. And I think that's also another way to create social awareness of such issues. So for that, I do give them credit.
And are there any other ways, do you think, that Taiwan can raise the levels of media literacy?
We have at least 3 very prominent, very vibrant fact-checking groups in Taiwan. One is the Taiwan Fact Check Center, and then we have MyGoPen, and then we have CoFact. The 3 of them use different methods to do fact-checking, but I think altogether they offer the synergy for everyday news consumers to find answers for themselves. So I think the first step really is to create this social awareness that don't believe in everything that you saw on the internet. That would be the very first step. To have that awareness is the crucial first step. And then you have all the report offered by fact-checking organizations. That will be the next step for them to find the solution. And I hope to see more collaboration and synergy between governments and civic groups and citizens to inform themselves and to combat this misinformation altogether.
Given the low trust that Taiwanese have in local media, where are they turning to for their information during this election campaign?
Social media, of course, and that is very, very dangerous. In the past, we say seeing is believing, which because of the confirmation bias, but now it is almost believing is seeing because of the algorithm of social media. And once you click a specific news article, you are going to see something similar again and again and again, and you being in this echo chamber and just believe this specific worldview, which is very, very dangerous. So this is like a chain effect. People have low trust in local media, so they turn to social media for their news consumption, and that gives power for so many YouTubers or content creators. Some of them had malicious intention, right? So again, that's why media literacy is so important, that we have to be aware of manipulation of this misinformation. We should be aware of that and then take action to counter that.
Chiaoning, thank you very much for joining us today and discussing this topic with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for joining us here on Zoom In, Zoom Out. For more programs from TaiwanPlus, please follow our social media, TaiwanPlus News. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching Taiwan Plus. Be sure to follow us on social media for more stories from Taiwan and around the world.